All right, let's jump right in and break down the really complex issue of environmental pollution in the Philippines. We're going to look at the data, the laws, and everything in between to get the full picture.
Okay, so where do we start? Well, instead of just hitting you with a bunch of dry definitions, let's talk about the problems you can actually see. The real, tangible stuff that has put this issue on the world map.
So this is the big one, right? This is the question that puts a global spotlight on the country. It's a reputation that really comes down to what researchers call high mismanaged plastic waste. Now, that's just a technical way of saying it's a symptom of much deeper, more complicated problems with infrastructure and society.
But here's the thing, the plastic problem is really just the tip of the iceberg. The country is fighting battles on so many fronts. You've got the air quality in huge urban centers like Metro Manila, which is just choked with emissions from cars and factories. You've got vital rivers that are seriously contaminated. And then there's the environmental fallout from things like mining and deforestation. It's a lot.
So to really get a handle on this, we need a proper diagnosis. It's not just one big disease called pollution, it's actually a whole range of different illnesses, and each one has its own unique cause and its own devastating effects.
Now, this chart is awesome because it basically organizes all that chaos into 6 clear categories. Let's take water pollution. The sources are everything from untreated sewage to chemicals washing off of farms. And the effects? They're huge. Diseases and even dead zones where nothing can live. Or look at air pollution. It's a straight line from traffic to respiratory diseases. This table really gives us a solid framework to understand exactly what we're dealing with.
Okay, so that's the what. But the bigger question is why? Why is all this happening on such a massive scale? The diagnosis tells us what's wrong. Now, let's dig into the root causes to figure out why it's happening in the first place.
And this is where it gets really interesting, because it's not just one single cause. It's more like a chain reaction. It all starts at the global level. Industrial production, international trade. That fuels rapid urbanization, which then puts this incredible strain on things like waste management. That problem gets even worse when you have weak enforcement. And then it all trickles down to what individuals do, like burning trash in their backyards. You can see how each step leads directly to the next.
Now, this is absolutely crucial to understand. The effects of all this pollution are not felt equally. This isn't just an environmental problem, it's a social justice problem. The data is pretty clear. People living in poverty or in informal settlements are way more likely to be near hazardous sites, and they often don't have basic sanitation. That means they get hit the hardest by the health and economic impacts of this whole chain reaction.
So we have the diagnosis, we know the underlying conditions, so what's the treatment plan? You might be surprised to hear that the Philippines actually has a pretty strong set of laws designed specifically to fight these problems. Let's take a look at that plan.
Before we get into the nitty-gritty of the laws themselves, let's get this term straight. When we talk about the regulatory framework, we're talking about the country's entire toolkit for fighting pollution. It's not just one law, it's a whole system of rules, the agencies that enforce them, and the policies that guide them. And when you look at the timeline, you can see this isn't a new problem. There's been a real push for decades to build a solid legal defense. It started way back in 1990 with controlling toxic waste. And then, right around the year 2000, there was this flurry of activity where they passed these huge, landmark laws to manage air, solid waste, and water, the very same issues we were just talking about.
Okay, great. Lots of laws on the books. But having laws is one thing. Who's actually supposed to enforce them, right? Who's in charge of making sure this stuff actually happens? Well, the answer is a little more complicated than you might think.
It's basically a two-pronged attack. At the top, you have the Department of Environment and Natural Resources, the DENR. Think of them as the national headquarters. They set the standards and the overall policy. But the responsibility for the ground game, for things like community waste management and local pollution control, that falls to the local government units, or LGUs. On paper, it's a really smart system. National oversight combined with local action.
All right, so we've got the laws, we've got the agencies. So how's the patient doing? What does the prognosis look like in this ongoing battle?
And this is really where the rubber meets the road. Because despite that great-sounding treatment plan, there are some major hurdles. There's what's called an enforcement gap, a huge disconnect between what the law says and what actually happens on the ground. Local governments often just don't have the money or the people to do proper monitoring. And you still have those deep-rooted issues like poverty and the explosive growth of informal settlements that create conditions where pollution is almost a given.
So if you take away just one thing from all of this, let it be this. The problem isn't the lack of rules. The real challenge, the massive challenge, is closing that huge gap between policy and reality, making those laws actually work for more than 100 million people living across thousands of islands.
Which leaves us with this one big, lingering question. We've seen the diagnosis, we've gone through the causes, and we've looked at the treatment plan. We've also seen the massive obstacles. So as we wrap this up, the question I want you to think about is this. With all these laws in place, what is that missing link? What's that one thing that's truly needed to connect that ambitious legal framework to a genuinely cleaner future for the Philippines?